Welcome to the first edition of our way too early 2025 fantasy rankings. We put these rankings out every year, and you can check them out on our website on votetheprocess.com. But this is the first year that we've done them on YouTube, and we hope you enjoy. Number one on this year's list is Lamar Jackson. The spot for this year's number one fantasy quarterback is really a toss-up, as both Lamar and Josh Allen are in the prime of their career, massively skilled throwers and rushers, and both playing an offense completely centered around them on incredibly talented teams. Although, for now, Jackson takes the top spot on this list because the Ravens' offense has surrounded Jackson with a better offensive line, running back, TE group, and receiving core than the Bills, if you compare the two. Jackson also adds just slightly more value on the ground, and most would agree he is at least a slightly better rusher and at the very least more explosive and faster than Josh Allen. En route to finishing as the top fantasy quarterback in 2024, Jackson had maybe the most phenomenal season of his career and gave us an unfair amount of mind-blowing highlights. He improved as a passer once again, showed impressive chemistry with almost all of his receivers, from Zay Flowers to Bateman to Likely to a resurgent Mandrews and everyone in between, and continued dancing around and running through defenders. The quickness of his release and his ability to launch deep balls are spectacles to be marveled at, and skills that translate to the stat sheet. When it comes to last year's QBs, Lamar Jackson ranked first in fantasy points per game and in total points with 430, and no other quarterback even broke 380. First in rushing yards, first in QBR and in passer rating, second in passing touchdowns to only Joe Burrow, sixth in passing yards, and he ranked tied for ninth in rushing touchdowns. Looking for one more random-ass stat to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Lamar should be considered the number one fantasy QB this year? He led quarterbacks in total efficiency versus expected, which is a statistical model from Opta Analyst, which measures efficiency by comparing success on every single play to a league average based on situation and opponent. Josh Allen comes at number 2 in this year's list. Allen or Jackson could have taken the top slot, as their skill sets and talent levels are almost equivalent, as is their fantasy production. The difference between the two when it comes to fantasy value is about as negligible as the difference between Nestle and a sociopathic serial killer. And by the way, if you don't know what I'm talking about with that, just Google Nestle water or look up the subreddit Fuck Nestle. It's got over 3 million members last time I checked, for good reason. Ultimately, though, Lamar took the top slot over Josh Allen this year simply due to being surrounded with just slightly more talent when you compare Derrick Henry to James Cook and Zay Flowers and Hopkins to whoever the Bills' top wide receiver is, in addition to comparing the offensive lines of the Bills and Ravens. However, one could certainly make the argument that anything the Bills lack just helps Josh Allen in terms of his rushing and his rushing ability, which lands him on the second spot on this year's list. Josh Allen's skill set is remarkable, and he has the velocity to hit any throw in the playbook while being maybe the best on-the-run deep thrower in the league. Combine that with his ability to bully defenders as a rusher and even hurdle right over them, and you've got an undisputed top 3 fantasy QB. In terms of 2024 quarterbacks, Josh Allen finished second in fantasy points per game to only Lamar Jackson, second in rush TDs to only Hurts, second in QBR, fourth in yards per scramble, fifth in rushing yards, and seventh in passing TDs. Allen also might be the most physical quarterback in the league, with an uncanny ability to truck, carry, and stiff-arm defenders. Last season, Allen led QBs in yards after contact per attempt, ranked third in total yards after contact in terms of QBs, and finished fourth in broken tackles amongst QBs. Finally, Allen has impressively almost eliminated the turnover issues that plagued him almost every other season of his career, and in 2024, Allen threw the 4th lowest percentage of pickable passes among quarterbacks that threw at least 300 passes. Number 3 on this year's list is Jalen Hurts, and while the Eagles' tush-pushing tendencies buoy Jalen Hurts' fantasy stock into the top 3 fantasy QB stratosphere, it is his constant Lamar-like improvement as a passer mixed with his Josh Allen-like tenacity as a rusher that is responsible for him being a top 5 fantasy quarterback. And it is those skills that will lead him to another fruitful fantasy season in 2025. Hurts now has proven that he can hit accurate throws at all levels of the field, run around and through defenders of all shapes and sizes, and has elite, quick decision-making skills that enable him to expertly run RPOs and perfectly execute play-action calls that end in long bombs. Although Saquon and the Eagles' commitment to the run caps Jalen Hurts' fantasy ceiling a little and prevents him from being considered among the top 2 fantasy QBs, Saquon's presence and the Eagles' rushing success opens up everything else for Hurts and prevents teams from keying on the underrated signal caller. Furthermore, Hurts might have the most talented duo of wide receivers in the NFL to throw to, as both Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown rank among the top 10 wide receivers in EPA per target since 2020. It's worth noting that the Eagles and the 49ers were actually the only 2 teams in the NFL with more than one player on that top 10, by the way. Hurts' constantly improving skill set and his top-notch surrounding talent resulted in the following marks when it came to last year's quarterbacks. He ranked 5th in fantasy points per game, 1st in rushing touchdowns, 3rd in rushing yards, 4th among QBs with 50-plus attempts in yards per attempt, 5th among QBs with 50-plus attempts in passer rating, and 8th among QBs with 50-plus attempts in completion percentage. Moreover, he's as strong, creative, and quick as he ever has been, and in 2024, Hurts led QBs in broken tackles while racking 4th in yards after contact. One final stat for the Hurts haters: he led the NFL in completion percentage above expectation last season, according to Next Gen, and finished 7th in average air yards differential. He also might not get enough credit for his ability to loft deep passes with plenty of air and throwing maybe the most catchable ball in the league. Last season, Hurts and his receivers led the NFL with the lowest drop percentage. In closing, all of the aforementioned points are boosted by the fact that the Eagles push touches about as often as blacked out single men at strip clubs, and it is more than likely that Hurts will rush for double-digit TDs again. In 2024, Hurts accounted for 51% of all of the Eagles' rushes inside the 5-yard line, the most by far of any quarterback. Number 4, Jayden Daniels. Now, in just one short season, Commanders fans went from literally having poop rain down on their heads to absolutely shitting on most of their 2024 opponents on their way to their first playoff win in nearly 20 years. Their last playoff win was in 2004 under coach Joe Gibbs, if any of you even remember him. The reason? Jayden fucking Daniels. If the Commies were tush-pushing like the Eagles, Daniels would likely have taken the 3rd spot on this year's list. But as it stands, Hurts has just a slight advantage in terms of his scoring potential, surrounding talent, and offensive line. Although there's a certain argument to be made for Jayden being a top 3 quarterback this season, and now with the addition of Deebo Samuel to pair alongside Scary Terry, Jayden Daniels' 2025 fantasy potential can't be understated. Daniels' overall arm talent is undeniable. His ability to read defenses and process information is astounding for a rookie, and he has Lamar Jackson-like speed and rushing ability. In just his first NFL season, here's how Jayden Daniels' stats stacked up against his peers at the position. He ranked 6th in fantasy points per game, 2nd in rushing yards to only Lamar, tied for 3rd in rushing touchdowns, 4th in QBR, 5th among quarterbacks with 300-plus attempts in completion percentage, 10th in passing touchdowns, and he also ranked among the top 5 QBs in fourth-quarter comebacks and game-winning drives. While Daniels' diminutive size resulted in some caution regarding his ADP last season, Daniels is not just an explosive playmaker sprinting by defenders when we're talking about him running. He's also finished 2nd to just Jalen Hurts in terms of broken tackle. At number 5, we have Joe Burrow. If Josh Allen and Lamar weren't 2 undisputed, generationally talented players, the Eagles weren't pushing tushes and didn't have that offensive line, and Jayden Daniels wasn't maybe the greatest rookie sensation we've seen in the last decade, Burrow would easily be the top fantasy quarterback. That's a lot of ifs, but Burrow is one of the most proficient passers the planet has to offer, and his 2024 QB ranks speak for themselves. Last season, he was 3rd in fantasy points per game, 1st in passing touchdowns, 1st in completions and attempts, 3rd in QBR and passer rating among QBs with 50-plus attempts, 4th in completion percentage among QBs with 200 attempts. And Burrow led the NFL in passing attempts in the red zone with 122, while no other QB even broke 100, so you know Cincinnati loves throwing in the red zone, and he's got a high touchdown potential. The Bengals' weapons raise Burrow's fantasy value by increasing the TD chances of every reception far beyond what normal starting receivers offer, and Burrow boasted the 4th highest TD percentage just a season ago. Impressively, Burrow did that while also finishing with the 7th lowest interception percentage, and as long as he doesn't end up in a massage parlor with his fellow AFC North counterpart Justin Tucker, Burrow will have an undisputed high-end QB1 season again in 2025. Coming in at number 6, we have Baker Mayfield, who has been absolutely on fire since arriving in Tampa Bay, much like the Browns organization has been a dumpster fire since choosing a rapist who literally sucks at football over Baker. And last season, Baker was no different as he finished among the top 4 quarterbacks in passer rating, passing TDs, passing yards, and fantasy points. Helps his fantasy value that he gets to throw those balls to Mike Evans, a future first ballot Hall of Famer, and Chris Godwin, and it's easy to see why Mayfield should be an undisputed top 6 fantasy QB again in 2025. Mayfield proved last season that he can still put up 20-plus point fantasy weeks even if Godwin and Evans are both unavailable, and drafting a quarterback you know can put up numbers even with no-name receivers has to be comforting, and it is that ability that gives Mayfield the best fantasy floor on this year's list outside of Hurts, Allen, or Jackson. In terms of 2024 quarterbacks, Baker's rankings were 4th in fantasy points per game, 2nd in completions, tied for 2nd in passing TDs, 3rd in passing yards, 3rd in completion percentage, and 7th in yards per attempt. While Baker doesn't add nearly as much value on the ground as, say, the likes of Lamar, Hurts, or Allen, he'll run when he needs to and add an underrated amount of value with his legs as he ran for the 10th most rushing yards among QBs last year. Baker did also rank among the top passers when it came to attempts, but Baker wasn't just a volume king as he finished passing success rate 3rd in lowest bad throw percentage, threw the 3rd most on-target passes, and finished 4th in overall well-thrown percentage. If you draft Mayfield in 2025, at minimum, you know you're getting a quarterback who should rank in the top 5 in passing attempts while playing in an offense that perfectly suits him, throwing to Mike Evans and Godwin, and playing in nearly perfect passing weather since 11 of his games are either in Tampa Bay, a dome, Jacksonville, or Nashville, Tennessee. As the great Paulie D would say, you do the math. Then at number 7, of course, we have Taylor Swift's boyfriend's friend. Mahomes is far from being outside the top 5 NFL quarterbacks when you're talking about what his value actually is to a team. As many would argue, he is still the undisputed most talented NFL quarterback until proven otherwise. But from a fantasy perspective, this fucking bum is lucky to find himself in 2025's top 10. Speaking as a fantasy owner who overdrafted him 2 seasons ago, got burned, and refused to draft him in any leagues in 2024, I can confidently say that watching a Matt Nagy offense is just slightly more pleasurable than sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic on the highway while doing your taxes. It's about the same stress level, too. Between drops, Kelsey aging, the Chiefs' mind-blowing inability to execute basic plays in critical situations, plus their willingness to settle for field goals, I have absolutely zero confidence that Mahomes will finish as a top 5 fantasy QB in 2025. In spite of everything I just said, Mahomes is at minimum one of the top 3 best all-around players in the entire league, which can't be ignored. And he did still notch some impressive QB rankings last season, including 13th in fantasy points per game and 12th in total points, 4th in completions, 7th in passing yards, 7th in passing success rate, 8th in QBR, and 9th in passing TDs. With a fully healthy Rashee Rice and Marquise Brown, Mahomes should throw more TDs than last year, as the Chiefs love throwing in the red zone, and Mahomes trailed only Joe Burrow last year when it came to pass attempts in the red zone, but fell below the league average when it came to TD percentage. In spite of Mahomes not putting up the fantasy numbers he once did due to the lack of explosivity in the Chiefs' offense and their addiction to field goals, his passing prowess and overall quarterbacking ability has not diminished. In 2024, Mahomes threw the 5th most on-target passes, passed for the 3rd most yards off RPOs, and had the 4th lowest pickable pass percentage among QBs who started at least one game. If you draft Mahomes, at the very least, you know you're drafting a quarterback who is consistent and at least will finish inside the top 15 QBs with high QB1 upside, assuming Rashee Rice and Marquise Brown are both healthy. Number 8, Yoda. No, that's Kyler Murray. Now, Kyler Murray's week-to-week fantasy performance is consistent but often inexplosive. Albeit scoring less than 9.98 fantasy points in only one game all season, Murray also never scored more than 28.74 fantasy points during any of his 2024 fantasy weeks. Despite not missing a single game all year, Murray also finished outside the top 10 quarterbacks in passes for 10-plus yards, passes for at least 20 yards, passes for at least 30 yards, passes for at least 40 yards, and passes for at least 50 yards. At the moment, Arizona has a very horizontal offense, which frankly is about as fun to watch as a crucifixion from a general fan standpoint. And it also hinders the fantasy stock of every player in this offense whose first name is not Trey. Murray also doesn't get much work in the red zone and finished outside the top 10 QBs in red zone passing attempts. Throw in the lack of chemistry with Marvin Harrison Jr. and the fact that he never gave fantasy owners even one 30-plus point game all season, and it's easy to see why he's low on this year's list despite adding great value with his legs, which is a major qualifier for most of the top fantasy QBs. However, it is Murray's speed, break tackle ability, he ranked 5th in yards after contact per attempt among QBs, quick release, ability to easily and calmly throw on the run, and knack for using his natural arm talent to hit layered throws that make him one of fantasy's top QBs this year. Among 2024 QBs, Kyler Murray's rankings were 12th in fantasy points per game and 10th in PRK, 4th in rushing yards, tied for 6th in rushing touchdowns, 7th in completions, 9th in QBR, and 11th in passing yards. Notwithstanding Kyler's lack of fantasy explosion, you could do much worse on draft day than a quarterback who adds significant value as a rusher, has one of the top 10 arms in the league. Remember, he also was 5th in passing success rate, 7th in completion percentage, had the 7th lowest bad throw percentage, 8th in on-target throw percentage, and he was 8th in completion percentage above expectation. And he technically did finish 10th in total fantasy points just last season. In 2024, Murray threw for the 5th most passing yards off of play action and averaged the 6th most yards per scramble. If the Cardinals can get some better blocking, and if Murray and Marvin can develop better chemistry, it stands to reason that Murray's 2024 consistency should translate to a higher 2025 fantasy ceiling. Coming into the 9th spot, we have Jared Goff. Jared Goff. Jared Goff. Goff could end up placing closer towards the top 10 next season, as the Lions were decimated by injuries in 2024, but do have one of the most productive offenses in the entire league. If Goff added even half of the rushing ability as, say, a Kyler Murray, he would easily rank above Murray and Mahomes on this year's list, and honestly probably should, as he plays in a better offense with more surrounding talent than both of them. Goff is one of the best play-action quarterbacks in the league, which is a perfect fit for the Lions offense, which is built around the run. His timing, touch, and anticipation are exceptional and are more than enough to earn him fantasy points from hitting St. Brown, Williams, Laporta, or Gibbs in stride and letting them take it to the house with their superior speed and playmaking ability. Jared Goff's 2024 numbers do the talking, and last season some of his impressive marks were 9th in fantasy points per game and 6th in total points, 2nd in passing yards to only Joe Burrow, 2nd in completion percentage among QBs with 50-plus attempts, 4th in passing touchdowns, 5th in completion percentage, and 6th in QBR. The Lions don't just have one of the most dynamic offenses in the NFL, but they have maybe the most explosive one too. And Goff's arm is at the helm. Last season, Goff led the NFL in passes for 50-plus yards, ranked among the top 5 QBs in passes for 10-plus yards and 40-plus yards. Plus, he finished the season with the 3rd highest TD percentage. Plus, Goff gets to throw to one of the fastest players in the league in Williams, one of the top 10 wide receivers in the league in Amon-Ra St. Brown, one of 10 tight ends in the league in Laporta, and has 2 of the league's top 25 running backs to take the pressure off. Those studs all do their part when it comes to Goff's passing yards and fantasy totals, and Goff and his receivers led the NFL last season in yards after the catch. Part of that is due to how supremely skilled the Lions playmakers are, but is also partially due to Goff's ability to hit his receivers perfectly in stride, especially on deeper throws. After finishing 6th in total points among QBs last season, at minimum, you are getting a lock-it-in, high-ceiling QB1. Number 10, and last on this year's top 10, Justin Herbert. Everything Jim Harbaugh has ever said about Herbert gives you confidence that the Chargers will continue to build the offense around his skill set and his huge arm. Remember, last season he ranked among the top 10 QBs in passes over 20-plus yards, passes over 30 yards, and passes over 40 yards. Yet, Harbaugh's ground and pound ball control offense limits Herbert's ceiling, and the Chargers had wide receiver holes last season that reined in Herbert's fantasy potential. When Ladd was doubled, other Chargers, especially Quentin Johnson, struggled to get open and catch the passes that Herbert was literally hitting them with. Given the fact that the Chargers' prominent wide receivers are, for the most part, unproven young upstarts, with the exception of the aforementioned Georgia product and Mike Williams, it might be difficult again for anyone to expect Herbert to sniff top 5 fantasy QB play just due to the Chargers controlling the clock and, in a sense, limiting their own number of possessions. Although I will say I do love the addition of Mike Williams back to the team, and him and Herbert already have chemistry, and Williams looked like a legitimate WR1 during the peak of his Chargers career, albeit derailed by injury. In terms of 2024 quarterbacks, Herbert ranked 11th in total points, 1st in yards per scramble, 7th in passer rating among QBs with 50-plus attempts, 8th in average completed air yards, 9th in passing yards, and 13th in rushing yards. He finished 3rd in passing yards off play action, no surprise given Harbaugh's love for the ground game, and 5th on-target throws as well. Nonetheless, Herbert and Chargers' limitations from a fantasy perspective is what lands him all the way down here on this year's list. Still, Harbaugh's unrelenting faith to run the offense through him, combined with Herbert's natural gifts as a passer and ability to add fantasy points on the ground, keeps him as a fringe QB1 headed into 2025. In addition, Herbert rarely hurts his own fantasy scores with negative points via turnovers and led the league last season with the lowest interception percentage. As always, like, subscribe for more, and thanks for watching.